Hi everybody, I'm Tom Wild from Pro Writing Aid. Thank you for joining us for another session in the Pro Writing Aid Ask a Book Doctor series. My guest, as always, for these sessions is our resident book doctor, Sally Oj. How are you, Sally?
I am very well, Tom, in these increasingly stranger and stranger times. I'm so lucky. It's a time for counting our blessings, isn't it?
It absolutely is, Sally, absolutely is. So tonight, Sal, we're talking about dialogue, okay? And we discussed this last week. And one of the things you said to me that really stuck with me was that if you can talk, you can write dialogue, right? Please expand.
It honestly is that simple. I think what happens is if you don't have a natural knack for it, which a lot of people don't, and it doesn't mean you can't end up writing fantastic dialogue, one tends to overthink, and your dialogue can become quite stilted, quite formal, which is the thing that happens a lot. All your contractions disappear and people say, I do not want to do that. I think it is a very bad idea. Instead of saying, I don't want to do that, I think it's a bad idea. And it gets sort of quite rigid. And there's always, I won't say it surprises me because that's not fair because I completely understand it. But the simple fact is, anyone who writes dialogue can speak fluently. And if you think about yourself in that situation, if you think, oh, I'm this character, I want to say, I don't want to do that. I don't think it's a good idea. Oh, why don't I just write that down? So it's very easy to overthink it. Of course, what you don't want everyone to do is speak with your voice or with one voice. You know, you have to mix it up a bit, and we'll be talking about that later. But it's really easy to get over sort of jammed up in thinking I've got to write authentic dialogue, when really you've just got to listen to the voice in your head saying, how would I say it? Or how would my mother say it? Or how would my friend Bob say it? And this sounds so simplistic, but it really, really, really helps. It honestly does. I've used this stimulus for so many people, and it really does work. One way of getting things to flow anyway.
But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because so many writers' forums, communities, groups will talk about how to get it right. What are the pitfalls? What are the warning signs? And what's your kind of advice to the writers you kind of mentor, Sal, or you work with? So, you know, how do you strike the right balance? How do you know what's too much?
Too much? I don't know what you mean.
Oh, so the balance of, you know, how much dialogue. So whether you've got too much dialogue on a page. So there must be a kind of.
If you don't mind, can you park that question for a second? Because I think that's going to the point after we've pinned down how to write good dialogue, then you want to know how much there is on the page. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start there then.
So there's, you know, when you're writing dialogue, I said, listen to the voice in your head, but obviously you've got to think about your character. You've got to think how old they are. You've got to think about, you know, what class they are. You've got to think where they're from, which doesn't mean, you know, you don't want everyone speaking in heavy dialect. Though sometimes, you know, if somebody comes from the north of England, there is a certain kind of inflection, there are certain expressions. You don't want to really go over the top with that kind of stuff. In fact, you definitely don't want to. But if you drop in a of course my mind's gone blank, but if you drop in a Cornish expression or an Irish expression or an inflection, you know, there's a real rhythm to all those regions in the way they talk. And you also want to make sure that the dialogue is just not part of the narrative with speech marks around it. That's really important. So some people have got, in some ways, very, they write beautiful narrative, and then, these speech marks come, and it's good because they write very well, but it doesn't ring true. It doesn't ring naturally. So it's a case of sort of loosening up, but it's also a case of thinking, who is my character? Where do they come from? How old are they? What would they say? And it's, as when we were talking about characterization, it's about making sure that you just don't have the same voice. This is so common. All the characters talking with the same voice, even if it's good dialogue, even if it's written very well, you get the same 5 main protagonists all sounding exactly alike. And although you don't want to lurch into having one of them being a Scotsman saying "Oh hi the new," and another one being a Frenchman saying "Hello hello," you do want to tease them apart and tease those voices apart. And that sounds very difficult, and it actually isn't. It's like all of these things, as soon as you've got the knack of it, as soon as you practice, just try it. Not even in your book, just try it as an exercise. And once you get the hang of doing it, it's much, much, much easier than you think. So you were asking dialogue on the
well, no, but it's in. So I guess there are lots of thoughts and kind of questions flying around my head, but so there is the one about how much is too much, and it's the same again with when you're talking about accents and so on. How far do you go? Because we've all seen dialogue that kind of it comes across as not being a true representation. People, for example, people from England talk, or the UK talking in very strong Cockney accents, which just wouldn't be applicable. And I guess it's striking the balance. But my previous question was, so at Pro Writing Aid, we talk about, the balance of dialogue. So not having too much dialogue on a page. And I guess it's one or two of the questions I've seen in the chat have talked about that point as well. So I wonder if there's any kind of guidance you give people on that.
But just, but one of the things, just to be clear, that you mustn't, like I just said, you do want to tease these people apart, and you want to get a sort of northern tinge or as Irish tinge. You very, very light hand with it.
Yes.
Don't want to shove it in. That's awful. So really, really light hand. So just so that the reader subconsciously picks it up, almost that light. So as is traditional, I've forgotten your question.
No, don't worry, because we'll come back to that question. Because let's look at in a bit more detail then about kind of how so dialogue tags, because that's another a kind of issue for people, like how they should be framing dialogue. So whether they should, people talk about only using said and other rather than other tags.
She said. Now this is where as people who join us often will know, I'm such a rebel, and I often disagree with the not disagree exactly, because I can always see the point, but I think if you go to, what you have to remember is, if you read a book about writing, and there's some fantastic ones out there, or if you do a class about writing, these people have to try and reach everyone. So they make rules because that's the way to reach everyone. If the author of that book was dealing with your writing, they'd be a lot less prescriptive, because they could relax and not. So it's not necessarily me just being a rebel. It's because I deal with people one-on-one, and usually, and that's what helps. So many writing books or seminars or classes will say, stick to he said and she said. You don't want to get fancy. You don't want to start putting other things in. It's invisible, just stick to that, it's fine. And to a large degree, that's true. It is invisible, except when it isn't. And when it isn't, it starts piling up like a motorway accident on the page. I'm sorry if that's in bad taste, it is a bit. So I've just been working on a book, which is an exceptionally good book, but during the dialogue, it starts well. This happened, he said, this happened, she said, this happened, she said, no, I don't think so, he said. After, when you get down the page a bit, he said, she said, he said, it's like it's slapping you across the face. So that's when I strongly urge people to break it up a bit. So have he said, she said, but also had he asked, he demanded, she queried. Queried is a bit weird perhaps, but you know, she giggled, because this is a wonderful place. Dialogue can be so useful for so many other things. We talked about description in one of our other seminars in one of our other talks, and dialogue is a wonderful place to bring in description, talking about the room they're in, the place they're at, the sunset, the wind, the rain, you know, the colors, whatever. But it's also a wonderful place to add emotional texture and depth and texture generally to the writing. So things like she cried, he begged, she murmured, he wondered. These are actually wonderful tools for bringing your reader into the moment. And I always use this example of saying, hey, stop, help, he said. Hey,
yeah, I get your point.
Help, he cried. You know, and we come back to your, what was it? Your Sarah, oh no, that was a different use of emotional language. She turned and stalked. But, you know, the use of the right word at the right time can really infuse your writing with a richness and a depth and a texture. And this is a perfect time to do it within the dialogue. So don't not have he said, she said, of course, but mix it up a bit and choose your words carefully, and it will make a tremendous difference.
Okay.
And then, of course, we come to when you have on the page, you have a long tract of dialogue. This person, that person, this person, that person, this person, that person, going down the page. It can be terribly difficult, even if it's just two people talking. It can be terribly difficult to keep track of which one is. It only takes one thing, and you're suddenly thinking, "Wait a minute, who's saying that?" So, of course, he and she is helpful, but if it's two men, then it's he, and then you've got to be careful with your pronouns, obviously.
Yes.
But then we need, what really helps then is the thing that I've talked about in other sessions, and that is what I call signifiers. And I shall take a breath now in case you'd like to say something, and then I will, and then we can talk about signifiers.
Well, so let's talk about signifiers. I really like the point you made about what dialogue is useful for. So I'd like to explore that in a bit more detail afterwards, because I've been reading some good kind of blogs and other things on the subject about how you can use dialogue to introduce, you know, backstory and what have you. But let's focus on signifiers, because do you want to expand on that? And do you want me to share?
We talked about this in another session. It's the places in the dialogue which are sort of invisible. You don't realize you're reading them, but you're absorbing so much information. And it also gives a dialogue it's a rhythm, it's a music, it's got a flow to it. And subconsciously or very consciously, the reader notices if the rhythm isn't right, if it's just bang, bang, bang. You want a kind of a flow, you want a kind of a music to your dialogue. And signifiers are the bits in the dialogue where it's he said, turning to look moodily out to sea. Now, hopefully, much better than that. I think, Tom, for any English people here will get this, there is one we have prepared earlier, is there not?
There is, in true Blue Peter style. Hang on.
So what I did, before you put it up, let me explain.
Yeah.
I used to find it not difficult, because most people get it obviously straight away, but I thought I need an example of this, and I struggled. I thought, which author, what shall I do, who does it the best, what shall I try and do? And then I thought, actually no, I've always got this, I'm sure we've all got them here, the pile a pile of book next to my bed, all of these books to be read. And they're all by good authors, hopefully. So I just literally picked the first one off the page, which is by a crime writer called Elizabeth George. She's a very, very good writer. I opened it completely randomly and I scanned that page. And then I highlighted the signifiers. So this wasn't chosen with any, the writer was accidental, the page was accidental, just to be clear. And it's talking about sex, which wasn't quite what I intended, but I stuck to my guns. So if you want to share it now.
Yeah, let's have a look. Okay, hopefully you can all see that.
So I'm sure that everybody knew what I was talking about anyway. But this is, when you have a look at this, it's surprising how much of it there is. It's surprising how much in this single tract of dialogue, how much of it is signifiers. And again, this is my word for it. I'm not sure what the proper word for it is. We had this discussion before. Some people suggested various things, but I call them signifiers because they signify what is going on. So it's quite interesting to realize how much is there on the page. And it's also interesting to realize how much you don't notice it. If it's done well and if it's done properly and if it's done with the right touch, it's just there, but you're learning all sorts of stuff. You're getting a good sense of their relationship as they're talking. You're getting a good sense of sort of what's going on. You're getting a good sense of what they're doing. So much is being told to us in this bit of dialogue because of the signifiers. So they are crucially important. For me, they are crucially important. And again, this can be something that you don't always find easy. It can be something that you can find a bit overwhelming or a bit scary to do. And all these things, just practice. And again, you see, I'm showing myself up now for a bit. I only just say the same three things all the time. Look at your favorite book. You will be staggered to see, if you don't know already, which I'm sure you do, you will be staggered to see how your favorite author uses his technique all the time. Unless, of course, it's their thing not to. And there are quite a few authors who just use absolutely naked dialogue, and that's kind of their style and that's their thing. But I guarantee you their readers get confused sometimes. What even if they love the style, they get confused. So
okay,
I've shot my mouth up.
Oh, that's great. I mean, it's like you said, and ever since you talked about signifiers to me, I've become really aware of them. But so when you have, so how do you work on dialogue with your new writers? So do you, do you find there are specific, what am I trying to say? What are the things that you that stand out that it's not right? Is it just a feel you have? So when you read a new manuscript, is it just a feel that you've got? Does it stand out as, that it's someone just isn't using the right techniques, or
what usually stands out straight away is if it's clunky.
Yeah, okay.
The first thing that always makes it clunky is not using contractions, which I mentioned with this thing. If you've got people saying, I do not, I have not, I will not, it's just not how people talk. I mean, of course, it is how some people talk, and that is a very good way of differentiating people, actually, because if somebody, or making a point, because if somebody says, I will not, that says a lot, as opposed to I won't. It can be used for emphasis, but generally, in general conversation, that is always the first thing. If there's no contractions, it's just clunky and it's wooden. However, I'm so surprised sometimes when I, one of the things I do for some of my authors, if they want me to do it, is I mark up the manuscript and I make changes. I mean, always changes that they can see and change back if they want to. the difference, putting contractions in dialogue, suddenly the dialogue sparkles. It's suddenly excellent dialogue. It's all there. It was just being dragged down by this sort of ponderous lack of contraction. That is one of the first things I see. Yeah. The other thing is when people swing too much the other way, and it is like, you know, it's all mocked me, or it's all dropped H's, and you know, if they're writing somebody from Ireland, every other word is begorra, or, you know, this kind of thing. That's not good.
Yeah.
And lack of punctuation, actually, and this is another controversial subject. Yeah. People forget that you can punctuate dialogue, and even if it's just a comma, it can make such a difference. Again, just bring it to life. And you know, as we all know, I'm a big fan of exclamation marks. So if somebody's screaming or yelling or shouting or begging, you know, I understand the wariness about exclamation marks in the narrative. I get that sometimes you can do it, but I get it. But in dialogue, when it's right, use an exclamation mark. You can use colons in dialogue. You can use semicolons. You can use dashes. You can certainly use commas. And people, I very often see just page after page of dialogue with nary a comma, nothing in there at all. And it just makes such a difference if you just put them in. And like I said, it suddenly springs to life. Oh my God, this is actually really good dialogue. So
what about actual kind of layout on the page? Because
very important. And we talked about this, didn't we, the other day? There are no hard and fast rules about layout. It's a stylistic thing, and you can basically do it however you want. But the crucial thing is clarity. The absolutely crucial thing is clarity. And we have sort of got used, all of us have got used to one person speaking on one line, the next person who speaks on another line, and then the next person who speaks again on another line. We're all used to that convention. But what people sometimes forget is if you have a line of dialogue, I don't think that's right, he said. In fact, I think it's a terrible idea. That some people would put that, in fact, it's a terrible idea, on a separate line again. Now, our brain says, this is a new person speaking. This is when we get confused. So people forget that if it's the same person speaking, even if you have put a he said or a signifier or something in there, you keep it on the same line. It's not a rule, but for clarity, it is much, much easier. And it's actually a problem I see a lot. People get a bit confused about how to lay out dialogue. Yes, the one line for each person rule is a sort of good guide. But yet again, have a look at the way that the dialogue's laid out in your favourite book. Now, all of these rules are there well, this isn't even a rule, it's a guide, but they're all there to be broken. You know, everyone's got their different way of doing it. You know, Roddy Doyle, who is extremely successful, I'm sure you've all read The Commitments or one of his books, you know, just uses a dash before each bit of dialogue, doesn't use speech marks. And at first it's really confusing, and then you just get into it, you go with it. But I remember even knowing Roddy Doyle's style, getting confused sometimes with that. So just help your reader as much as you can. You know, they just want this nice, smooth glide down the river of your beautiful prose. They don't want to, you know, hang on to the edge of the boat worrying they're going to fall off. So just keep it nice and simple for them. Help your reader, think of your reader, always say the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. We've got a stack of questions piling up, so I'd like to dive in with some of those, if that's all right, Sal. So one of the early ones we got in was advice for those like me who are not native speakers, so the nuances of the language don't come to us naturally. Is that a question of research?
Well, this is controversial. Watch telly. Watch TV. Listen, notice how people speak. Of course, you don't have to watch telly. It's just easier. If you're talking to somebody and trying to study how they speak at the same time, you're going to have a lot of embarrassing. They're going to wonder why you said a wombat when they asked you what time it was. That you need to. The easiest way is to read other books, watch TV, watch films, but TV is better because it tends to be more naturalistic. Watching any of the Marvel films, that's not particularly natural dialogue. Though I don't know, Doctor Strange got to talk quite naturally, but so that's one way.
Yeah.
Develop your ear, and you can develop your ear. It's not something that everybody has. But again, if you practice, if you think, it's like driving. We've talked before about the Rumsfeld box, consciously incompetent, unconsciously consciously incompetent, unconsciously competent, consciously competent. So it's like that. It's like, think about learning to drive. It's like, at first, it's everything you do. I've got to look in the mirror. I've got to put my handbrake on. I've got to change gear here. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. After a while, you just breeze through it. So writing is a lot of skills you can learn. Now, of course, talent counts for a lot. Of course, having a good ear counts for a lot. Of course, confidence actually counts for a great deal. But you can, all of the things we've talked about, you can certainly learn to be much, much better at. And much, much better is often quite good enough.
Great. But on that point, this is an interesting point, because this links back to something else we talked about the other day, which is good enough. But it's linked, but it's not directly linked. We talked about the fact that when you submit your manuscript, right, it needs to be in as good a place as possible. And actually, dialogue, I think you said something about dialogue can bring out laziness in authors. Is that right?
Yeah, so I don't remember exactly what we were talking about when I said that, but the underlying point, and I'm sure we shall get there, the underlying point is that when you submit to anyone, somebody like me, or certainly to an agent, you've really got to have the manuscript in the best possible health. I remember what we were talking about. We were talking about layout.
Yes, right.
Some people think, if it gets picked up, they'll fix it. They'll fix it. The publisher will fix it. And there is truth to this. If your book gets picked up, it will be rigorously pummeled by a sub-editor, and they will pick up on everything and they will fix everything. But if you want an agent to be interested in you, they do not want to think you are sloppy. They do not want to think you are lazy. They do not want to think you can't be bothered, because all of this signals to them, this person's not going to be great to work with.
Yeah.
And it's terribly important always, there's no exception to this, that you have the manuscript in absolutely the best possible health you can before you submit it to anybody. And that includes, of course, spell checking it properly. You'd be astonished the number of manuscripts I get that aren't spell checked. And you know what happens? I get really annoyed. And then I'm reading your book and I'm really annoyed. And that's not what you want me to be when I'm reading your book. Yeah. You must proofread it really carefully. It's hard to proof your own book. So you get somebody else ideally to read it through, or 2 or 3 people to read it through for you if you can, just looking for typos and things. Of course, a few typos are okay. Of course, the occasional spelling mistake is okay. But if it's consistent, if it clearly hasn't been spell checked, that's shocking. And I have sent manuscripts back to people in bad humour. And I'm lovely, as you all know, because what a waste of everybody's time. I don't want to be struggling, and it stops me enjoying the read. It stops the flow. So the layout of the dialogue is very important that you get it right, because if there's no just sitting back and thinking, they'll fix it. If it gets, they'll fix it. That's really dangerous to think like that.
Okay, absolutely, and you're right. We were talking about layout. I'd completely forgotten that point. Okay, Bonnie asks, long sentences are wrong for dialogue?
Long sentences you break up with signifiers.
Yeah.
Or he said. Yes, they are wrong because your reader sort of subconsciously holds their breath as they're reading it. And of course that's not always true, but this is what he said, she said, and signifiers were made for, is long sentences. And what usually happens is you get a very long sentence and at the end it says, he said.
Yeah.
If you look at a good author, they'll have the beginning of that long sentence, he said, then they'll pick it up again, and at the end they'll say, he sat down and opened the biscuits. So, you know, so break up long sentences. What really nags and stumbles the eye is if you've got a long sentence and then he said at the end of it. Because even though that's true in life, this is not life. This is entertainment. This is your reader enjoying themselves. This is making it as lovely for your reader as you can.
And so linked to the next question, Sal, should you actually, do you need tags at all? In that situation, when it's clear who's speaking, do you need a tag?
It's not always clear, that's the trouble.
No, okay. So again, comes back to, sorry, I was going to say putting yourself in the shoes of the reader.
Yeah, right? If you've got two people, I guarantee you, if you've just got two people talking and there's a long track, if it's just a few words, then it's fine. Yeah. Then it's fine, of course it is. You know, bam, 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 that's okay. But if you've got much more than that, if you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, at some point, somebody's going to say something that could have been either, could refer to what either of them is saying, and you're lost. Yeah. And you have to go back to the top and think, wait a minute, and you go back and you literally trace it down. You don't want your reader coming out of the story. You don't want your reader to have to think about it. Of course you can, and this is what Roddy Doyle does. He just does pages of it. To be honest, I think, and I'm a big fan of Roddy Doyle, one of the things is I think when most people read The Commitments, they'd seen the film and they could picture it all and they could see it all very clearly and they could picture the characters saying it. And I think that really helped people to get into his style. And more power to him, you know, that's great. What I was quite surprised at the time was that Alan Parker read the book and thought, wow, this is a fantastic book. This will make a great film, because it can be difficult. His style can be difficult to get the emotion, to get the feeling. Of course, Alan Parker has got this eye, or had, may he rest in peace, had this eye, to know what he was looking for. But there are several very well-known authors. It's almost a trademark that they just give you long tracks. But you have to, the thing is, it's a skill. It is a skill to do that. They craft it very carefully. And you know, if you're going to do that, you've got to be very clever and craft it really well, and always think of your reader and always be careful to make sure that it's crystal clear who's saying what. And it gets a bit wearisome on the eye, to be honest. It just goes on and on and on, in my opinion.
So I've got a really interesting one here from Serafina, who asks, how would you have a character use sign language? Describe the hand gestures or create an additional character to translate only? I have no idea.
That is a brilliant question.
Maybe that's one for our chat panel. Any it is out there?
The thing is, the truth is, you can go in so many different ways. You know, you could have a third character. You could have somebody who understands sign language, and you just make that clear at the beginning, and drop in the occasional gesture. You know, she touched her lips furiously, or you know, she breezily, you know, did whatever she did. I don't know sign language. I hope I didn't just say something disgusting. Or you know, or you know, to drop in the occasional gesture, or you know, obviously your character could lip read, but that's an excellent, very, very good question. But there are lots and lots of ways you can go about it. You just have to find the thing. Again, you want to find the thing that's not going to tax your reader too much. They don't want a three-way conversation for everything. They don't want the translator saying, she said this, he said that. You know, again, you can use it sparingly. You could do it. So no, it's a very interesting question. Sorry, I can't be more conclusive.
I don't know. So, I mean, always questions are always good for the rest of the community to get involved into in chat, and that tends to be, I think Shirley's just mentioned, possibly have the character lip read, which is an idea. Moving on, so this comes back to the question I kind of started at the beginning, which is about the kind of percentage of a novel that should be dialogue. So Loveford asks this: what percentage of a novel should be dialogue? Now, I'm just going to mention at this point, in Pro Writing Aid, there's a report called the Dialogue Report you can run that measures the percentage of your text that is dialogue. It also highlights all of your dialogue tags, so you can easily find them and navigate around them. But I mean, there isn't a rule, right, Sal? I don't think. It's just
absolutely not. Absolutely no disrespect to the person who asked the question. I haven't got a clue. I mean, I don't know. You just know when it's right, don't you? You read a book, you know when something's working, you know when it's right, and you can have. There are plenty of books that have whole chapters with nobody speaking, because that's right.
Yeah.
I always suggest in a chapter like that, I do say, because it comes back to showing rather than telling. So I do try and, but then you don't necessarily need to have dialogue in showing, don't telling. So no, you just have to do what comes naturally.
Yeah. Okay. Jack Boyles asks, subtext is key to dialogue. How would you advise approach subtext in a revision? How to add it?
I'm so sorry, but I don't understand that question.
No. Okay. Well, I was hoping you might understand, because I'm not sure. So Jack, maybe you can add some more on that and post a second question, a follow up to that, and we'll pick up on that. Okay. What about how should a character's thought? Oh, I see. Sorry. How should a character's thought, not spoken dialogue, be written?
Italics.
Italics.
That's the convention. I mean, it very much depends on the house style of the publisher, actually. But I would always suggest italics. People understand. They know what you mean. They get it. They're used to it. Or people put it in. Some people do put the speech marks. But that can be a bit confusing if they're thinking. So it's very, very clear. If you just use italics, it's really, really clear. And there are probably many ways of doing it if I think about it, but that's certainly what I would immediately suggest.
What about kind of the things you shouldn't use dialogue for, Sal? So are there any specific things? So
Let me jump in here.
Okay.
We talked about this the other day. Exposition. You really have to be careful of this, and it's so tempting. It's so tempting for any writer, if they're trying to get some facts across to the reader, to have two characters talk about it. And it can be done, and it can be done really well. But what you do not want to do is have two characters telling each other things that they would already know, so that the reader can know it. And you certainly don't want them to, I've used an example like this in another session. You don't want somebody to say, "Hi, Bob, you're my cousin. I haven't seen you for 10 or 12 weeks, and the last time we had a bit of an argument, but it's all okay now. How are you?" Obviously, that's wildly exaggerating, but people do stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's so easy to put facts into dialogue. So you really, really, if you can have exposition in dialogue, it is a good place to get some facts across, but you've got to do it so well. You've got to do it so carefully, and you've got to do it in such a way that the reader doesn't realize what's happening. And again, that comes down to practice. So just be really, really careful. First of all, don't have two policemen. You don't have one policewoman saying to the other policewoman saying, "I think I'm going to use my truncheon. It's a large stick that's heavier at one end than the other. It'll probably knock him out." Again, wildly exaggerating, but the other policewoman knows what a truncheon is. Nightstick if you're American. So, just be very, very careful if you use that device, that you use it wisely.
I do love your examples.
I wish I had them planned. They just come out of my head.
I think that's what makes us so good. Okay, so we've still got. This is great. Do keep. We've got probably 5 to 10 minutes left. So if you have got any questions, do post them now. Shirley asked, for a character with a stutter, would you use dots or dashes? I'm assuming something along those lines.
Either, but if
Yeah.
you use dots, this is something else that's got to be done properly. Ellipses, as they are called, 3 dots only, and then a space. That's how you use ellipses. You don't, not 10 or 12 or 2, 3 dots and then a space.
And a space before the 3 dots, or just the...
A space after the 3rd dot.
Okay.
That's the right way to do it. Or a dash is fine as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, should you use tags with the character's internal dialogue? Example, he wandered or she worried.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That was easy. More questions like that, please.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, so Bonnie asked, I think this is going back to the punctuation point, and she says, I thought publishers did not want semicolons. Is that
This is another really controversial thing. I love semicolons, used very sparingly, because nothing else does what they do. That's why.
Yeah.
No, who was it? It wasn't George. Was it George Orwell? It was somebody who declared he was going to write a whole book without a semicolon, and did. People hate them. They loathe them. But I'm a big fan, because, you know, they do something that nothing else does. I don't think I believe it's not true. You see, every publishing house will have their own style, house style. Every in-house editor will have things that they hate or love. Every agent will have things that they hate or they love. So I think semicolons, more than anything else, come and go through the process of a book being published, you know. But I'm very keen on them. I like them simply because, as I've said several times now, they do what nothing else does. You can use a dash instead of a semicolon, but if you do that, the writing can get very, very heavy with dashes. So I would say chuck one in every now and then. You know, just use them gently. I'm really resisting any condiment talk, but just every now and then. But it's personal, you know, if you hate them, don't use them.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So I think this is something we've kind of covered. Should the dialogue always come at the beginning of a line? So for instance, in that example, the paragraph, she spoke first. Sorry, I should have read this one before asking it. I thought dialogue always had to be separate.
No, it doesn't. This is what I mean about people, and again, with no disrespect to the person who asked this question, this is about it's overthinking again. If you put, Jack walked into the room and looked around, what the heck is going on, he said. That's all right, isn't it? Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
If you have, what the heck is going on, said Jack after he walked into the room, not so good. It's fine to start a line of dialogue with a signifier or something. It's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
And look at your favorite book. You'll see it happens all the time, in the right place.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Okay, if you have a character who spaces out in middle of conversation, how do you mark it? With an M dash? I guess you could use ellipses.
It can have an M dash, or what we in England just call a dash. You can use ellipses. I would suggest ellipses, because a dash or an M dash, we tend to think that means someone's been cut off while talking. So if they're talking, hey, what the hell are you, dash. But what the hell are you, ... is much more pensive. It's much more, what the hell are you? Do you see what I mean? Whereas the dash is like,
yeah.
Stuff
I never knew. This is great. What about Sorry, Dana's asked, since we use italics to indicate thoughts, is there a way that's acceptable to agents and publishers to strongly emphasize a word or two? And they go on to mention the fact they got nailed by an editor for using bold once.
For using what?
Bold.
Bold. Bold isn't a great idea. No, I would always go for italics. I mean, everyone understands it. The thing is, every agent is different. Every agent is different. Every publisher is different. Every in-house editor is different. And again, very often, if you don't have very strong feelings about your punctuation and layout, they will do it in their house style. You can always say, I really want it to be like this. And they will probably listen to you, probably, should your book get published. But they usually will have a, you know, if you look at Penguin books, they're usually, you know, very similar in the way the punctuation and layout and so on is used, or any other publisher.
Yeah.
Please don't, my point is, please don't stress. I know this is, again, when you read books, and they're very good books, and when you read, or you attend a class or you attend a seminar, they're blanket covering every possibility. So they're having to give you very general rules. And these are good general rules. I'm not knocking them at all. But it cannot possibly apply to every agent. It probably apply to an agent they know or to themselves. So please, you know, don't stress. I mean, yes, bold is a bit, I would agree with that. But it's okay. That is something that can be fixed. You know, it's not something that is confusing or disruptive or in any way problematic, really. Stick with italics. Everyone understands italics. Everybody understands italics. And if you really want to use bold, talk to your agent about it once you've got an agent.
Yeah, great. Right, so we're running short of time. So anything anything we've not covered that you wanted to kind of include before we sign off? Yes,
and you all know what it's going to be. And if I could hear everybody, they'd be chorusing it now. Anyone like to jump in and suggest what I'm going to say? Always read out loud. That's what I'm going to say. Read your dialogue out loud to yourself and you will immediately see where it needs to be changed. It's like a magic trick for authors. I don't know why people don't do it all the time. Read your book out loud to yourself. You will see so much, and especially with dialogue, actually, you will just see why it's wrong. If you read out to yourself, I do not want to do it, I do not think it is right, you'll go, yeah, that's not good, is it? So read your work out loud to yourself.
Okay. Thank you.
I always say try and get somebody else to read it out loud to you, because that's even more effective. But you have to bribe them well to get them to do that.
Okay. Thank you for that, Sally, as usual. I've just posted a link to a blog on the Pro Writing Age site about 5 tricks for using dialogue to write truly captivating characters. So please have a look at that. There are some other blogs on there as well that may be useful if you're struggling with how to use dialogue. Just one final question I saw pop up in chat that I didn't get around to answering, but I was desperate to. I think it was Shirley with the reference to Blue Peter, asked whether Blue Peter is still going. It is, Shirley. And I know that because my children each received their Blue Peter badge about 3 weeks ago for various things they've achieved in lockdown. If you're not from the UK, I do apologise. It's a very well-known children's programme, loved by all.
If you are from the UK, I have to say this. I'm friends with Valerie Singleton. How much have I rocketed up in your estimation now? Have been since I was a child.
I think I knew that, Sally, and it still impresses me each time I hear it. Thank you to everybody for joining us again. I must admit, it's felt like a rusty one for me. It feels like a while since we've done the last one. I haven't felt particularly on form tonight, but hopefully by next month, by February, when we do historical fiction, we'll be back on top form. We really appreciate you joining us for these sessions. and all that you contribute. Until we talk again in a month's time, stay safe and well, everybody. And do keep your questions coming in. You can reach us through our support channel at Pro Writing Aid. Sally's available on Twitter, as am I, and you can find us through Pro Writing Aid links. Sal, have you got your Twitter handle to?
You know, I never know what it is. Just look for Sally OJ. I'm sorry, I don't know. Or you can look at my webpage, which is sallyoj.com. Thanks,
Sally,
everybody. You've been fantastic as always. It's been a real pleasure. I love doing these sessions, and it's all down to all of you. And of course, to Mr. Wilde, the debonair Mr. Tom Wilde.
Thank you very much, all. Have a great day, rest of the day, evening, or whatever. Speak to you soon. Bye.